What's going on, it's the Polygon Don, and today I want to talk about 5 more underrated PS4 games from my collection. Games that, for whatever reason, just didn't resonate with the masses at the time of launch, but maybe with hindsight and cheaper price points might be worth your attention now. So with all that said, let's get into it.
That glowing blue fellow.
The day is done, and the darkness falls from the wings of night as a feather is wafted downward from an eagle in his flight.
Wait, don't go. Was it something I said?
A genuinely solid isometric action RPG, Victor Vran is rarely spoken of when games from this genre are the topic of conversations, which is a crying shame if you ask me, as this incredibly underrated game should and needs to be given its well-earned flowers. Set in a world where magic and science meet, this dark fantasy gothic fairy tale is both grim and beautiful, thanks in large part to its art design and colourful combat abilities. You will play the role of demon hunter Victor Vran, who, after arriving at the fantastical city of Zagoravia, decides to aid the locals in fighting off the demon infestation that has taken root within the city's walls. The story and the writing in general isn't particularly exciting, but it's more than adequate, and the voice actors do a good job of breathing life into their characters despite some shortcomings in the script.
The survivors are gathered around the war table. There's tension in the air.
And if the VO of Victor himself sounds at all familiar, it's because he is voiced by none other than Doug Cockle, made famous for his performance playing Geralt of Rivia from the Witcher series. Combat is where the game shines though, which is all you can hope for in a game from this genre. At first glance you might think Diablo clone through and through, and while it definitely shares some similarities, it deviates enough to carve out its own lane and provide something fresh for veterans of the genre to sink their teeth into. It's not revolutionary and doesn't reinvent the wheel or anything, but it certainly has its own charm and appeal that separates it from its contemporaries. The speed of progression is also worth making note of, as both character progression and progression through the levels themselves were noticeably quite speedy. You level up quickly, which seems to always add another string to your bow in terms of damage dealing or abilities, making the act of simply playing the game incredibly addictive. Equally, the way in which the world and the levels within it are laid out alongside the objectives you are set and the overall quest designs makes for a very fluid and kinetic gameplay experience. As in almost every level, you have your main objective as well as some additional bonus objectives. These vary from time-based or exploratory, for example, and aren't compulsory, but do increase the amount of additional XP you can gain by completing them, so are definitely worth it. In fact, barring the time-based objectives, if you're the type of player that likes to methodically comb through areas before exiting them, then you are likely to achieve these organically anyway, so like I said prior, leveling up comes thick and fast, which is great as this just means more skills and abilities for you to play around with. What I did really like about this game though is that it's not really class-based, as are a lot of the RPGs from this subgenre, meaning that all of the loot you either find, purchase or forge are equipable from the jump. With melee and range combat at your disposal that you can switch between at the press of a button, discovering all the many deadly tools this game offers you becomes all the more exciting. On top of this, there's a Destiny card system in place which add buffs and benefits to your character and gear alongside demon powers that can be utilised to either harm your enemies to devastating effect or heal you when you're low on health. So there is a ton to get stuck into here and tinker with, but like I said, it's not really class based and pretty much everything this game puts on the table is yours for the taking. And there is genuinely a lot of content here, especially with the Overkill edition, which adds 2 massive expansion packs into the mix. Motorhead Through the Ages adds a heavy metal spin on the game, while Fractured Worlds takes on a slightly different look and feel overall, but both add loads more content to this already impressively lengthy and well polished action RPG. Whether you live and breathe these games or haven't really dived into them before, this is well worth checking out and buying physically if possible. I still regularly see the Overkill edition for under £10, and it comes with a load of extra goodies in the game case, so it's well worth adding to the collection.
We always knew this could happen, old friend. That we become monsters ourselves, that we fall to the darkness. Rest in peace, brother.
Berserk and the Band of the Hawk is a 2016 Musou game utilising the license of iconic manga and anime series Berserk. Developed by genre definers and Musou legends Omega Force, it has all the trappings you might expect, both good and bad. You'll be eliminating waves of enemies in open fields with just a single swing of your sword, and you'll occasionally come across bosses that will require you to switch up your game plan ever so slightly to ensure victory. I'm not going to lie, if you're not into these kind of games, then Berserk Band of the Hawk won't really offer up anything new to the formula that could potentially change your mindset. I do enjoy these games on occasion, but even for me, its appeal comes mainly from the original IP it's licensing for use. Its unique brand of mindless hack and slash gameplay suits the world of Berserk incredibly well. Playing as the legend that is Guts, for the most part anyway. You can play as other characters after a certain period of time, but for the majority of my playthrough I kept it simple and played as troubled hardman Guts as he mows down sea after sea of foes. It's not the best or worst looking game, but it does run surprisingly well on the PS4 and PS5. There's a lot going on screen at any given time, the sheer amount of moving enemies and blood splatter effects, which are pretty much a constant in all gameplay sections. I would have expected a lot more frame rate dips than I ended up experiencing. In fact, looking back, I really don't recall any such instances, which is definitely a huge benefit with these types of games. Missions will require you to be sent on quests to destroy enemy strongholds or capture particular targets, etc. And these will have their own sub-objectives set within them, such as destroying all enemy catapults or eliminating a certain number of officers, for example. Doing so provides rewards such as upgrade materials and jewellery that can boost stats like vitality and attack, etc. But don't expect full-blown and robust RPG mechanics here. It is fairly light on that front. The combat itself is also very basic. There really isn't much depth to it at all. There are literally 2 buttons you'll be repeatedly pressing over and over again, with the occasional option to trigger a special Musou attack. Now, I don't really play these type of games for the complexity of their combat, but even within the genre this is particularly button mashy, which I do think is worth mentioning. However, that's not to say that it isn't still enjoyable to play. The simplicity of it and the IP used provides its own brand of satisfaction, as seeing Guts whip out his weighty oversized sword and wipe 50 plus enemies off your screen in a flash of crimson was still a spectacle whether you're a fan of the anime and manga or not. Speaking of which, one of its biggest draws is the fact that you get hours of anime lifted straight from the movies that are dished out piecemeal between missions, and these are absolutely stunning as you might expect and completely captivating. Chronologically, the story charts the events from the Golden Age arc through to and ending with the Hawk of the Millennium Empire arc, reliving those iconic moments between Guts and Griffith before it all went to hell, and seeing Guts' relationship with Casca develop and blossom were a genuine delight. More than anything, this game just provides a nice and cozy interactive way to experience those early days of Berserk. You really don't hear a lot of people talking about this game, and those that do tend to have negative opinions on it, which I think is a little unfair. So whether you fall into the category of being completely unfamiliar with the IP, or you're a seasoned fan of the series that just hasn't given this a go yet, despite its problems, it's still well worth playing and finding out for yourselves. I should add that it's not the easiest to come across these days, with used copies still selling for the initial retail price, if not more so. So if you were interested, I'd move on this one sooner rather than later.
Brought this on yourself.
Eternights is a dating sim meets action-adventure RPG where you attempt to find love during the apocalypse. Taking place in South Korea, it follows an 18-year-old male protagonist that you will name and his best friend Chani as they try and figure out the best way to meet up with girls. Chani presents himself as the ultimate ladies' man, although it is clearly evident that this is far from the truth. His bravado nevertheless convinces our protagonist to follow his lead and get onto the latest dating app to create a profile. It's not long into the intro that our hero gets his first match and a date is set. However, that news is quickly shattered as it is revealed that the latest wonder drug, the Eternights supplement, a drug supposed to reverse the aging process and extend people's lives, has mutated and is now turning people across the planet into monsters, ushering in the end of the world. Perfect bloody timing. Our hero and his lovable idiot of a best friend soon find themselves in an underground bunker sheltering from the doom and gloom happening on the surface. Eventually they brave it and venture out of their protective hideout, only to find that the bunker itself has become overrun with monsters. Fighting your way through what effectively is the first dungeon of the game, you will eventually meet Yuna, an adored pop idol that also happened to be sheltering in the same bunker. Now, I don't want to say too much else on the plot, as what actually transpires was surprisingly mature, with certain events taken on a genuine brutality that I was not expecting. But suffice it to say that you end up getting a magical arm that can take on different forms and acts as your main weapon. With regards to combat, this is a third-person action game that can feel like just another button masher in the first few hours, but actually gets deeper and more nuanced as the game marches on. You'll be hitting strings of combos with light and heavy attacks, and these will eventually allow you to unleash a heavier special attack after hitting R1, which drains even more of your adversary's health. You can perfect dodge out of the way of any incoming attacks that briefly slows down time for everyone but yourself, allowing you to get a few extra hits in, and there's also an elemental mechanic in place that further switches things up when things start to feel a little too comfortable. Once you meet and add new characters to your party, they in turn provide new ways to engage with your enemies. Dealing damage slowly builds up a charged meter found in the top left of the screen, and once full, a quick press of L2 will initiate a series of quick-time events that, when completed successfully, can have devastating effects on your opponent. The combat is nothing new, but is perfectly serviceable and can still provide a genuine challenge, especially when surrounded by multiple enemies with different attack patterns or when going up against the game's bosses. On the flip side of combat is the surprisingly deep bond mechanics or dating sim aspect of the game. When not crawling through dungeons beating monsters to a bloody pulp, you'll be leading a much more wholesome and thirsty life on board a train which acts as your base of operations. Here you can spend time with members of your party, getting to know them better and further fleshing out their characters. Go scavenging for items or even play minigames that strengthen your own character. You have multiple choice answers to choose from when conversing, and depending on which you select will increase different stats such as confidence or expression, for example. You decide what to do and who with, but there's a catch in that the main mission objectives have a set completion date, so there's that constant feeling of not enough time in the day or days in the month to do everything you want to do, and save the world at the same time. Choosing what matters most to you becomes a big part of this game's overall vibe. A genuinely dark tone and unexpected humour with characters that were incredibly well written and likeable. This was really enjoyable to play through its roughly 12-hour campaign. It is a little rough around the edges. The UI, for example, almost feels like placeholder UI, so don't expect a AAA Square Enix joint here. I'd say it has that same AA level of polish as something like Dust Diver, another underrated game that I've covered on the channel before, but this veers more into that companion bonds and dating sim aspect of something like the Persona series. It doesn't get everything right, but for what it is and for how cheap you can find this game, if action RPGs are your thing or you like the idea of dating someone during the apocalypse, this is well worth trying out.
Of this land, and having your lives in my hand. That's right.
Persona 5 Tactica is a tactical SRPG that, while a chibi spin-off of the mainline game, actually takes place concurrently with the events of Persona 5. Joker and his crew find themselves in LeBlanc as they prepare for graduation when a news bulletin informs them of a renowned politician's disappearance. Very soon after, they find themselves mysteriously transported to a medieval European-looking town ruled by tyrant Queen Marie. Caught off guard and completely overwhelmed, Marie brainwashes and captures almost all members of the Phantom Thieves, except for Joker and Mona. On the verge of surrender, they are rescued just in time by a local freedom fighter and leader of a resistance called the Rebel Corps. With the help of their new ally Irina and her Rebel Corps, getting the band back together is what drives the opening missions of the game. It's not solely set in medieval Europe either. You will eventually travel to different parts of the world and in different times too, but I'll leave it there. You can discover that for yourselves if you decide to pick this one up. Gameplay is your standard strategy RPG affair, including grid-based navigation, a weapon affinity system and turn-based combat. With a maximum of 3 party members allowed to go into battle, your objectives will either be to defeat all enemies or reach a certain area of the map for the majority of levels, excluding boss battles obviously, they're very much their own thing. You will use cover to mitigate or completely eliminate damage coming your way and utilise your surroundings, such as gaining a height advantage by climbing onto rooftops in order to gain the upper hand in battle. It's all fairly standard stuff if you play these types of games a lot. What differs here are the additional unique elements that come directly from the Persona series, such as summoning personas in battle and fusing your own powerful personas in the Velvet Room. Guns also play a major role, and depending on the firearm itself can either hit single enemies or multiple enemies at once. If a cluster of enemies were all huddled together, it would be more efficient for Haru to engage them with her shotgun rather than Joker with his pistol, for example. What I love about this, however, is that not only has the elemental affinity returned, things like wind, fire, ice and electricity for example, but in Tactica they have a much more literal effect. Mona's wind abilities can actually blow enemies off of rooftops or out from the cover they're hiding behind. It makes total sense and adds such a deeper level of strategy when planning out your attack or who is best to take with you on a particular mission. And just like the main game, knocking enemies down grants you a one more turn, which not only provides another opportunity to attack your target but also resets your movement, allowing you to relocate to more advantageous or defensive positions. There are a couple of mechanics here that are completely unique to this spin-off, however, that I thought were brilliant. The first is the triple threat attack. Once a member of your party has knocked down an enemy and been awarded a one more, if instead of attacking you switch to your other party members that still have action and movement points available and position them in a triangular formation around the downed enemy, a burning triangle appears. Switching back to the character with the one more, you can then trigger a triple threat attack, meaning anyone caught inside the triangle will suffer very significant damage. Trying to get as many enemies caught in this burning triangle of death became a mini meta game that I love trying to incorporate into almost every level. The next thing I love that's unique to this spin-off is that unlike the main game, your party members can utilise more than one persona. These are called sub-personas and offer additional skills and passive abilities to your party members that they just didn't have access to in the main game. It's not a game changer or anything, but being able to add additional persona abilities to the cast of characters that either further enhances or rounds out their skill set was genuinely welcome. Another massively underrated Persona spin-off. I've already discussed Strikers on the channel before, and much like that, this is rarely given the love and respect it deserves. Whether you're a Persona nut like myself or not, if you like tactic RPGs, this is still well worth picking up the next time you see it. I've also seen the price of physical copies of this drop considerably recently, so now's a great time to pick a copy up. Killzone Shadowfall is a futuristic first-person shooter and the fourth game in the Killzone series for home consoles. However, it's the sixth in the franchise overall. A PS4 exclusive and the first in the series to use the Decima engine from Guerrilla Games, the studio that would later find fame and acclaim using Decima to develop robot dinosaur exclusive Horizon Zero Dawn and its sequel. Taking place 30 years after the events of Killzone 3, you'll play as Lucas Kellan, a shadow marshal who is investigating a rising threat in the continuing war between Vector and Helghast. After the devastating events of Killzone 3, with the Vectan planet being divided into two and a great wall erected to separate the two civilizations, years of built-up animosity between the Helghast and the Vectans have reached boiling point. Covert operations from both sides occur regularly as they each try to end a war that both claim the other started. It's a first-person shooter first and foremost, but Shadowfall does introduce some more gameplay mechanics to enhance the overall experience. You can initiate a scan of your nearby surroundings, highlighting any enemies that might be trying to flank you, and this is done by holding down right on the D-pad I believe, but the longer you hold it, the further the scans reach, but get greedy and hold it that little too long and it will make a sound alerting enemies to your position. Probably the best new addition, however, is the introduction of Owl that you will meet very shortly after starting the game. Owl is your very own personal drone that comes with 4 abilities that you're able to utilise from the get-go. You can issue commands to attack your enemies, hack or short-circuit alarm systems and other electrical equipment, shield you, or provide an impromptu zipline for you to descend to lower ground with. Owl can also revive you should you fall in battle, but only if he isn't currently recharging from a prior use. Owl is a massive help, but you still need to choose when and where to use it should you get outmaneuvered and outgunned. The zipline and the fairly sized open areas that you'll be battling in provide quite a vertical playground for you to navigate through, allowing for a good deal of flexibility when it comes to completing levels, and the enemy AI are also fairly smart too, providing a decent amount of challenge. The presentation in general is of a very high standard, with the whole spectrum of the colour wheel seemingly being used, along with plenty of particle effects and shiny sci-fi surfaces and surroundings. It's just a very pleasing game to look at. However, Shadowfall is still a bit of a love it or hate it type game. Fans of the previous 3 entries, which released on PS3, disliked its story, and veterans of FPS titles found the gunplay to be somewhat lacking. While I agree that Shadowfall's story isn't anything to write home about, I actually found the gunplay to be the perfect mix of speed and weightiness. Each of the different guns you can pick up from downed enemies had their own distinct feel to them, and most importantly, heft. The shotgun was particularly punchy, as you would hope, as was the power and speed of the futuristic railgun thingy. Also, the introduction of stealth that is unique to this entry in the series is definitely a welcome inclusion, allowing you to sneak up on enemies to get a quiet melee kill in or charge at them when you've run out of ammo, and switching between firearm and melee attacks was fluid and cinematic. I really enjoyed my time with this game and find the sheer amount of negativity surrounding it somewhat undeserved. Could they have done better? Yes, probably, but that's not to say that this is a bad game. Massively underrated if you ask me, as is reflected by the amount of unwanted copies I still see in used game stores for dirt cheap. If you're curious and see it on your travels, I say pick it up and see for yourselves. The prices you can still find it at, I really don't think you'll be disappointed. Well, there it is, gang, another 5 underrated PS4 games that I don't think get the love and attention they deserve. What did you think of the games in this list if you've played them, and will you be picking any up if you didn't? Let me know down in the comments section, as I'm always up for hearing what you guys think. But that'll do it for today though, so until next time, take care, be good, and game on.